Have you ever really stopped to think about the pure physicality of your feelings? It's something we all experience every single day, but it's still, a huge mystery. Today, we're going to dive into a completely new way of looking at it.
I mean, think about it. Why does bad news literally feel heavy, like a real weight in your chest? And why can a moment of pure relief make you feel like you're actually floating? These aren't just metaphors we use, they're physical sensations. And we're about to explore a pretty fascinating framework that tries to explain exactly why that is. So, to really get a handle on the physics of our feelings, we first have to look at where our current ideas don't quite tell the whole story. We know a ton about the chemistry of emotions, hormones, neurotransmitters, all that stuff, but that doesn't really explain the physical feeling of it all. Look, traditional psychology has given us some incredible tools, for sure, but it kind of struggles to answer these purely physical questions. Why does pressure build up until we burst? Why do we crash from exhaustion? Why does a good cry feel so light? These physical feelings hint that there's another layer to the story, maybe a structural one. And that brings us to the core idea we're exploring today. What if an emotion isn't just some random psychological event? What if it's the physical experience of your body processing information? Just think of it like informational weight. When the amount of information flying at you is more than you can process, your whole system comes under pressure. And that pressure, well, that's what we call an emotion. Okay, so if emotion is a form of pressure, how does that system even work? This is where a really powerful analogy from the world of physics can make things crystal clear. In the physical world, pressure always builds up before there's some kind of big release, right? Think of tectonic plates grinding against each other before an earthquake. This framework basically says our emotional systems work the exact same way. We build up all this pressure from stress or even from overwhelming joy, and eventually it's got to be released, whether that's a huge burst of laughter or a flood of tears. And this leads to a really wild hypothesis. What if our emotional systems follow the exact same structural laws as physical systems? If that's true, it changes everything. It means our feelings might not be as random or chaotic as they seem. Instead, they could be governed by predictable physical principles. Now, this whole groundbreaking idea is part of a framework called Triune Harmonic Dynamics, or THD for short. It was developed by the researcher and author Kevin L. Brown, who took these principles from informational physics and mapped them onto the super complex world of human emotion. All right, so how does THD actually organize our emotions? Well, the model suggests that all of our feelings fit into three totally distinct groups, and it's all based on the structural job they do for us. So here's the whole model at a glance. You've got the dense core, which gives us stability. Then there's the neutral space, which is like a shock absorber. And finally, the fast perimeter, which handles all our interactions with the outside world. Let's break each one of these down. First up, we've got the dense core emotions. The best way to think about these is like your personal center of gravity. They give you your sense of self, your stability, your identity. They're basically your emotional bedrock. And these emotions, they feel heavy, grounded, and just incredibly stable. Contentment, for example, is just your baseline, a state of really low pressure. Honesty is when your internal state perfectly matches what you're showing on the outside, which creates this amazing structural integrity. And that feeling of quiet determination, that's your system holding a really heavy load without buckling. Next up are the neutral space emotions. These are basically the mediators, the system's shock absorbers. They're what help us process and balance all these opposing forces without completely falling apart. These emotions feel, well, spacious and balanced. Empathy is what lets you match someone else's emotional state without totally losing your own. Bittersweetness is that incredible ability to hold two opposite feelings, like joy and sadness, all at the same time. And reflection, that's just the quiet process of taking in new information and making sense of it all. And finally, we have the fast perimeter emotions. These are the high-energy states. They live right on the boundary between you and the rest of the world. They're all about interaction, change, and transformation. These feelings are fast, they're electric, and yeah, they can be pretty unstable. Anxiety is what happens when information is coming in way too fast for your system to handle. Vulnerability is the act of lowering your shields to let a connection happen. And catharsis or pure joy, well, that's the explosive release of all that pressure we talked about. It's your own personal emotional earthquake. So now that we've got this new map for our emotions, what does it all mean? What's the big deal? Well,
having a physics-based model for our feelings has some absolutely staggering implications. For starters, if emotions are governed by predictable laws of pressure, then psychology could actually shift from being a descriptive science to a predictive one. I mean, just imagine being able to forecast our own mental and emotional weather patterns.
And think about technology. Instead of building AI that just mimics empathy by recognizing patterns in our words, we could create AI that actually understands the underlying physics of emotional pressure. That would allow it to respond in a way that's genuinely supportive. And maybe, most powerful of all, this could totally revolutionize mental health. If we can measure the buildup of this informational pressure, we could potentially predict and even prevent crises like burnout or panic attacks or depressive episodes before they ever even happen. Now, what's really important here is that this isn't just some neat philosophy. Triune Harmonic Dynamics is presented as a testable scientific hypothesis. And any good hypothesis has to be falsifiable, which is a fancy way of saying it has to clearly define the conditions that would prove it's wrong.
So this slide lays out the test. The theory is wrong if someone can experience an extreme emotion with zero measurable change in their body. It's wrong if emotional breakdowns happen just randomly, with no buildup of informational load. And it's wrong if a person can withstand extreme stress forever without ever breaking. The fact that all of these conditions sound pretty much impossible, well, that's exactly the point.
It all really boils down to this one single, elegant statement. If informational pressure, which is P, becomes greater than the system's critical threshold, PC, then an emotional transition, like laughing or crying, is going to happen. It's a clean, testable scientific claim about the fundamental nature of being human.
And this brings us to one last, much deeper question. If our emotions are simply the physical expression of a system that's processing information, what does that imply about consciousness itself? Maybe it's just the internal observation of all these structural changes as they happen. A pretty fascinating thought to leave you with.